Well, g'day guys and welcome to part 2 of our Off-Grid series.
All right, so before we rip into today's content, first we want to congratulate Jennifer Thompson. You are the winner of the $100 Everything Caravan and Camping voucher.
Congratulations,
Congratulations. If you could just send us an email, simon@lifestylepioneers.com.
Yep, and I've also replied to your comment on the YouTube video that we did last for the Off-Grid series, so you should get a notification for that as well. But yeah, get in touch and we'll let you know how you can claim that $100 voucher. We've also got another $100 voucher to give away in this video, so stick around till the end and we'll let you know how you can win that. And yeah, looking forward to that. Blown away by the response we got from the water video as well, our first one in the Off-Grid series. You guys were loving that content, which is really great to see. We're stoked, and some really good shares as well in the comments. You guys really got involved, exactly what we were hoping for in the comments there, and shared a lot of your tips and feedback as well, which we really appreciate.
Yeah, so if you haven't watched the water video, go after this video, go back, watch it and read through the comments too, because as we said earlier, everyone travels differently and everyone's got different ideas. Yep. And there's just a wealth of knowledge out there in the travelling community, and we're all more than happy to share. So read those comments, give yourself some extra tips on how to save water. All right, should we rip in?
Well, hang on, before I get into that. So, yeah, a couple of the top tips that came through in the comments, things that we didn't mention. A few people did ask about grey water. We are going to cover that in our waste section. We're going to have a whole video about waste, or a whole section in a video about waste and managing waste, including your grey water. So stick around later in the series. We will be covering that. A lot of people sharing their tips about saving water when they have a shower, catching the cold water before the water gets hot and using that for other things.
Dry shampoo for the win. Oh my gosh, it's the best thing since canned beer.
Yeah. So there was a few really good tips in there. So if you do want a few extra tips, as Liz said, go back to that video, jump in the comments there and have a bit of a look. And do the same thing in this video, please. Leave us a comment. Let us know if there's anything you think we miss in this one. We're going to be covering off-grid power systems in this one. How to specify an off-grid power system that suits your needs, not what a salesman tells you need, or not just as simple as grabbing the biggest battery bank that you can and hoping that it lasts while you're traveling off-grid. Making sure that you get a system that suits you and the way you travel and what your power needs are.
Exactly. So it's going to work for you so that you can travel how you want to travel, with everything you want and nothing you don't. So in this video, we're going to be covering off how to work out what your power needs are.
Yep, that's the big one.
Like, how do you actually work out what you're going to be using on a daily average?
And then how you're going to store that power and how you're going to get that power back into the system, which is certainly the one that most people miss the most. So as we said, stick around to the end of this video as well. We'll mention how you can get your hands on another $100 gift voucher. We'll be giving away another one of those in this video. And yeah, if you haven't subscribed already, this is a 12-part off-grid series that we're running alongside our travel content as we're traveling down here in Tasmania. We're currently parked up at Ted's Beach on Lake Pedder, which is an absolutely stunning spot in the southwest Tassie wilderness. And yeah, you're going to have to put this one on your list, but you'll have to wait for an upcoming video to find out more about that one. The next video in the Off-Grid series is going to be a case study, basically. So taking everything that we talk about in this video coming up, about how to spec your system, how we applied that to spec the system that's in our Off-Grid caravan, and then how that's actually working out for us, the things that we've done that are working well, the things that we would probably change if we were doing it again, how much power we actually use, all of those sorts of things in a real-world scenario, putting the theory into practice. But before we get to that, in this video, we're going to be going through basically all that theory, how to spec the system that's going to suit you, and making sure that you get a system that's going to allow you to travel the way you want to travel.
Yeah.
Let's get into it.
Before we really kick in, let's just go through a bit of our background. So we started camping in swags.
Yep.
Then we went to a rooftop tent.
Yep.
Then in a homemade camper trailer that...
a homemade camper on the back of the ute in a rooftop, yeah, and then the camper trailer. Then we upgraded
up to a camper trailer, and now we're in a caravan. So we've been through a bit of a journey with our setup and our system, and our needs have evolved over time, and how long we've been traveling and how long we get to go away for. So originally we just went off for like weekends and a couple of weeks at a time. Now we're obviously full-time off-grid. Now, we're not by any means electrical experts.
No.
But I would say that you are.
Well, it's information that I've learned and gathered over years of research, experience, as Liz said, that we've been camping and travelling off-grid for a long time, 2 years full-time, but before that as well. And also just from talking to other travellers, talking to different experts within the field. So it's a whole range of places that I've gathered this information. I've got no qualifications or background in electrical, so I'm not going to try and get into too many of the nitty-gritties like that. This is really just conceptual stuff to help you get your head around how power systems operate and how you can make sure you get a system that suits you. When we're talking about off-grid power systems, I really think about the system being broken down into 3 different components. We've obviously got the batteries, or what is the storage component of the system. There's the regeneration component, which is how you're going to get those batteries recharged and get power back into the system. And then obviously at the other end is your usage and how you're going to be using the power, what your power needs are going to be. The biggest mistake I think we see a lot of people making with battery systems, particularly when they start talking about big off-grid systems, is that they start with battery storage. How much can I store? How big of batteries can I get? I think that's a big mistake. I think that's where you end up either over-specifying or under-specifying your system and not really getting a system that's suitable for your needs. It's much more important, I think, to figure out what your needs are going to be and then specify a system around that, because as we see a lot of people do, they get a huge big battery system. Either they don't need it because they don't have the power needs that system can deliver, or they don't specify the regeneration to be adequate for that battery system, because a big battery system's all well and good, but the most important thing, if you talk to any traveller who's spent a long time travelling off-grid, is how you're going to get that power back into that system. So the first job is really just making a list of all the appliances and devices and everything that you're going to want to be able to run off-grid.
Yeah, so think about things like your fridge, your lights, any fans that you want to have, maybe iPad chargers, laptop chargers, cooking devices that you want, like induction plates, anything you want. Yep. Basically, that's going to consume electricity. Your aircon, don't forget your aircon.
Yeah, if you want to run your air conditioner off grid, and then obviously, a lot of people these days are running things like air fryers. We run a Thermomix off grid, so if you want to be able to run that, you want to take that into account. So just anything that you're going to want to be able to use off grid, you want to sort of just write down a big list of all those things that are going to run off power and that are going to need to run off your power systems to start to get an idea of what your power needs are going to be.
Exactly. And then so from that list, then you need to work out how much each of those consumes, how much power each of those consumes.
Yeah, so the first step for that is figuring out how much you're going to use each of those things per day. So you want to try and gauge an idea of, in an average 24-hour period, what your total power consumption is likely to be. So figuring out how much power each of those uses is really the first step. Is just list down in that list of those items that you're going to be using off-grid that use power. You want to make a list next to them of roughly how many hours on an average day you're going to use those. So for example, our induction cooker, we use that on average probably half an hour a day.
Yeah.
Similar with the Thermomix, but we tend to only use either the Thermomix or the induction cooker. Occasionally we'll use both if we've got the power, but you may not need to take that into consideration. On the flip side,
the fridge,
yeah,
you want to run that 24 hours a day.
Yeah, so you need to make sure obviously that's the primary one, is keeping your fridge going. We find most of your other power needs you can do without a lot of them if you do need to save power at times, but you want to sort of try and gauge an idea of, in an ideal scenario, ideal conditions, what is going to be your average 24-hour power consumption.
That's right.
So the next step to that then, once you've got an idea of how many hours a day you're going to be using those appliances or those devices, is figuring out how much power they consume. So if it's a 12-volt appliance, which is basically anything that's wired directly to your battery or plugs into a cigarette lighter outlet or a USB or anything like that, a 12-volt appliance. So these are going to be things like your fridge, your lights, your water pump, all those types of things.
Your phone chargers.
Yeah, they're going to have an amperage rating. So that's going to tell you how many amps per hour that device uses. Now, if you already know from the previous step how many hours you're going to use it, obviously you can just times that by how many amps it consumes per hour, and that's going to give you an idea of how many amps in total that appliance or device uses in a 24-hour period. So I can lose people here sometimes with this part of the conversation because it gets a little bit confusing, I think, when people aren't used to talking in amps. But really, if you just think about amps as being like litres of water in a water tank. So your battery is your storage. It stores power in amps, and you're going to consume power in amps. And in the same way that if you're storing water, you're going to have X number of litres in your water tank, and you can consume X number of litres out of that, and what's left over is how much you got left.
I love that analogy. That's how Simon explained electricity to me, and it just sunk in. Once he said electricity works the same way as water works, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense.
So it really is as simple as that. It does get a little bit more complicated when you start looking at your 240-volt appliances. So a 240-volt appliance is going to be basically anything that plugs into a household power point. And things like a caravan air conditioner and things like that, if you're running those, will likely run off 240 volt. If you've got a washing machine in your caravan, that'll probably run off 240 volt. But most of those appliances, or in fact, in my experience, all of those appliances, their power usage is going to be measured in watts.
What's a watt?
Watt is a watt, yeah. Well, to convert watts into amps, it's as simple as dividing it by the voltage that you're going to be running it at. So in our circumstance, we're storing our power in our battery in 12 volt, and we want to understand it in amps. So it's really as simple as taking the wattage of the device or appliance and dividing that by 12 to put it into 12 volt, and the number you get will be the number of amps it consumes. For example, a 1200 watt appliance at 12 volts, so 1200 watt divided by 12, 100 amps. So that's your 100 amps per hour.
Per hour.
That device is going to use. So if you're only using it for half an hour, obviously it's half of that. So from there, you can sort of go through then all your 240 volt appliances that you've written down, find out what their wattage rating is, and divide that by 12 to get it into amps, and then times that by however many hours a day you're going to be using that appliance.
All right, Liz, question. Where would I find the watts and amps rating on the appliance?
Yeah, so unfortunately it's not as simple as just it's in the same place on every device. Generally a kitchen or a household appliance, or even things like hair dryers and things like that, anything you plug into the wall, there'll often be sorry, you're going to have to excuse my croaky voice.
What have you done? You're eating a frog.
Yeah, got the croaks going on. Might need to get a drink of water. Yeah, so unfortunately that's not as simple as just it's in the same place on every device. Generally, kitchen appliances and things like that will have a sticker or a plate on the bottom of them or the back of them. So if you look underneath or spin it around. Googling is often a good one. Google if you can find the part number on that sticker, but it doesn't give you the wattage rating. Google that part number and you should be able to find how many watts it consumes. Things like your air conditioner or your washing machine in a caravan, you might have to go again and do some Googling and find the specifications for that online and find out what the wattage rating is. Sometimes for things like washing machines and stuff, the good manufacturers will give you an idea of how many watts or watt hours they consume for a cycle. So a watt hour, don't get confused by that. It's just how many watts per hour it uses. And again, if we want to get an idea of how many amps per hour it uses,
I'm going to divide it by 12 for us.
Divide it by the voltage. That's it. So divide it by that 12 volt, which is what we're storing in our batteries, and that'll give you how many amps then per hour it uses. You don't need to get too complicated.
All right, so let's sum up. So to work out your power needs, what you need to do first is work out what you're going to be using. Write a list of absolutely everything that you can think of that you would want to be running, and then how long you're going to be running that device for. And then next to that, another column that would have what that device's power usage is converted into amps. All right, so that's step one. And then you're
going to get a total. So then at the end of all that, you're going to add all those numbers together. How many amps per day you're estimating that you're going to use those devices for, and that's going to give you your total amp use per day. And we're going to use that in the next step to then figure out what our replenishment needs are going to be to make sure we're getting that back. Because if we're not getting at least what we're using back every day, you're going to get
into trouble.
Well, you're going to get a debt. So you're going to be gradually going backwards each day in that you're not going to be getting your battery back to 100% each day. So you're gradually going to be going backwards, and it's going to restrict how long you can spend off grid. That might not be an issue for you depending on how you travel, and we'll get into that in the next section. To work out our replenishment requirements, once we've worked out what our average usage is going to be, it's really important to sit out and have a think about how you're going to travel, where you're going to travel, when you're going to travel, and how long you want to be off-grid self-sufficient for. Because all these are going to determine what your replenishment requirements are going to be, and what the most suitable replenishment option is going to be for you. Now, if you're going to be traveling in the tropics, for example, in the dry season, it's more than likely there's going to be plenty of sunshine. So solar may be a really good option. In the same way, if you're planning to spend extended periods at camp and be off-grid for long periods of time without driving your vehicle, then your alternator charge is going to be far less useful to you than someone who drives their car every day or every couple of days. Then their alternator charge is going to be far more important to them. In the same way, if you're the sort of person who wants to just travel for 3 or 4 days at a time off-grid, in between stopping off at caravan parks, or if you're just a weekend camper that's only spending a few days off-grid at a time, that's really going to start to determine what your replenishment requirements are and what the best replenishment option is for you. So it's really going to come down to figuring out how you travel, how long you want to be self-sufficient for power for, how long you're going to travel for. If you're just a weekend traveler, you don't need to have a system that's going to last you weeks and months. Obviously, that would be overkill. And by the same token, if you want to spend long periods off-grid, you may not be wanting to rely on that 240 volt power to get that charge back into your batteries. So let's talk a bit more about solar. Alrighty, so when it comes to solar, there's really 2 main options you got. Fixed panels, like the ones on the roof of our caravan behind me, and portable panels like the one over here. Now, like most things, there's pros and cons to both. Fixed panels obviously had the advantage that they're there permanently and working all the time. So if you do have roof space on your setup, it is probably worth considering having some sort of fixed panel on the roof. But then portable obviously has the advantage that it's portable and you can move it out into the sun. The thing with having the panels permanently fixed to the roof of your setup is that you generally want to park in the shade to keep your setup cool in the summertime in particular, but then you also want to be parked in the sun to get maximum solar into your system. So there are pros and cons to both, like I said. A combination is probably not a bad way to go, but the downside to portable is it's something extra to carry. You do need somewhere to store it, and you do have to get it out and pack it away each time you move camp or each time you need to use it. The panels we've got up on here are known as glass panels. They tend to be the most efficient. You can also get flexi panels that are a bit lighter weight and can stick down onto the roof, but they don't tend to be as efficient. The other downside to having panels flat on your roof like this is they just don't tend to generate as much solar yield because they're not pointed directly at the sun. There are a few downsides, but by far and away the biggest upside is that they're there all the time and they're working all the time. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to set them up or pack them up. They just stay there and do their job. Most of your solar panels, or in fact all the solar panels that you come across, are likely to be rated in watts. So again, to convert that into how many amps they're going to be putting into your battery system, it's really as simple as dividing it by the voltage that system is. So in our case, or in most cases, that's going to be a 12 volt system, like we said. So you're going to be dividing the wattage rating of that panel by 12, and that will give you the maximum amps that panel is able to produce. I say maximum because it's very unlikely that you will ever see the maximum amperage or maximum wattage coming out of your solar panel. It's just a fact of solar generation is that they're never 100% efficient. And as I said earlier, laying flat on the roof, they're never going to get 100% yield either. In our experience, we find that panels sitting flat on the roof like this will only generate about 60 to 70% of their maximum rating in most conditions. Now, again, as I said before, it's going to depend on where you travel. Down south, you're going to generally get longer days, but you will also get lower yield from your solar because the sun is lower in the sky. Up north, you will get better solar yield in general because of that sun angle is higher in the sky, so the flat panels will generate more yield. Now, as I said as well, one of the advantages to portable panels is that you can point them or direct them towards the sun. You can move them throughout the day. You can avoid any shade and things like that. So you will tend to find you'll get better generation out of those panels. But the downside, as I said as well, is that you do have to set them up, pack them up, move them around. So there's a few pros and cons there to consider. Again, there are a couple of different technologies when you're looking at portable panels. Generally the most cost effective or the cheapest ones are the glass panels, similar to these ones on the roof that fold up. They're the ones that have been around for years. Downside to them is they're quite bulky and can be quite heavy as well. The newer ones are these blankets and portable panels that are made from a different material, and they generate power in slightly different ways. I'm not going to get into the full details of how solar panels generate power. I'm by no means an expert, but it is worth doing some research and figuring out what you think is the best solar for your needs and the way you want to travel, because yeah, there is a few different options out there. So now we've figured out how we're going to replenish our batteries, either through solar, through that 12 volt alternator charge, or from a generator and 240 volt. we need to be able to get that power back into our batteries. So that is where we're going to need to look at our battery charging options. So let's jump down inside and we'll take a look at the battery chargers. Would you like to add something?
Fancy seeing you here. No, I just wanted to come up and say hi. I missed you. Is it coffee time?
Just wanted to pop in.
I just wanted to pop in and remind you it's coffee time. Did Simon tell you that this is his favourite thing to do on a Sunday, is clean the solar panels? So after he finishes filming this, that's what he's going to be doing. Because it improves your solar yield. He gets out there, shines them all up, and then goes down and checks the system to see how many extra watts coming in. Did I get that right? Watts?
Amps.
Damn it.
Well, either. You can measure it in either. All right, let's get in and have a look at the chargers that we use to get all that power into our batteries. Ugh, it's a little. We might just clean.
I was going to clean it before you showed everyone.
This is real life. So because our chargers and battery systems sit under our main seating area, which is where we obviously also eat, and children eat in particular, tends to get quite a lot of food.
It's not food. It's just like fluff and oats. Just a lot of oats.
Anyway, we'll just quickly vacuum so that you can actually read what's written on the chargers. No, we don't really need to. It'll be all right. It's real life. Don't worry about it. It's all good.
Don't judge us too much.
First things first, your alternator charge. To get your alternator charge into your battery system, particularly if you're towing and your battery that you're charging is a long way from the vehicle's charging system or the engine bay of the vehicle, a long cable run like that to carry that electricity from the engine bay right back to your battery, you can get what's called voltage drop, which basically just means that the voltage or the electricity runs out a puff as it comes along that long run of cable. And so the best thing you can have and these days with lithium battery systems, it's really recommended that you have what's known as a DC-DC charger. Now that's basically just saying it's taking DC power and putting it into the batteries as DC power. So it's not actually converting that electricity, it's just increasing that voltage. It's basically giving it a little pump to push it into the batteries at the correct voltage. So we take that water analogy again. If you're pumping water from a long way away, pumping it all the way up to your house or wherever it is that you're going to be using that water, by the time it gets to the house, it might have run out of steam a little bit, might have run out of puff, and the pressure's starting to die off. So think about your DC-DC charger as like a second little pump that's just going to pump that pressure back up or pump that voltage back up to make it suitable for the batteries and to make sure you're getting optimal charging going into your battery system. So that's the job of your DC-DC charger. Now, your DC-DC chargers these days will generally also have a capability to be able to regulate and accept charge from unregulated solar panels. So solar panels that have no built-in regulator themselves. A lot of DC-DC chargers these days, or most of the good ones, will have some form of solar capability to accept that solar charge, convert it into the correct voltage, correct format for your batteries, and put that power into your batteries in the optimal way. Where you might run into limitations with using your DC-DC charger for solar charging, though, is that DC-DC charger will have a maximum amperage rating, and that's basically the maximum amount of amps that it can function at and put into your batteries at any one time. For example, our EnerDrive charger that we have, our DC-DC charger, is rated to 40 amps, which pretty well means the maximum amperage it's going to be able to input back into our batteries at any given time is 40 amps. Where that becomes a problem is if your solar array or the amount of solar you have exceeds that 40 amps, it won't be able to put in any more than 40 amps. So you may have solar yield that goes to waste. So the other time that limitation may come up is when you're driving and your DC charger is handling your alternator charge. Chances are you're going to be getting close to 40 amps coming straight from your vehicle's alternator. So what that means then is if you're driving on a sunny day, any of that solar yield that would have been coming from any permanently mounted solar panels on your roof isn't going to be getting into your batteries because the charger has reached its maximum capacity. How can we avoid that, or how can we get around that? Well, what we do is we run a secondary solar charger. So it's a charger that's just for our solar panels, and we leave that DC charger to just handle that alternator charge from the vehicle when we're driving, and that allows us to basically double up or put alternator charge into our batteries simultaneously with that solar yield that's coming from those permanent rooftop solar panels. This makes a huge difference to our solar regeneration when we drive, because it takes that 40 amp maximum up to an 80 amp maximum, and we often see 60, 70 plus amps going into our batteries while we're driving on a sunny day. Now, depending on the size of your solar array and how, again, what your setup is and how you choose to travel, that may be unnecessary for you to have a secondary solar regulator, and you may be able to just use the solar that's built in, the solar regulator that's built into your DC-DC charger. But it is worth thinking about if you're going for quite a large solar array and you do have a large battery system where you need to get maximum amps back in. It's really worth considering having a separate solar controller to manage that solar charge. Now, similarly, if you want to be able to charge your batteries from an AC power source, basically when you plug into a wall, 240 volt power, whether that be when you get back home, whether that be when you're in a caravan park, or whether that be from the generator that you might be running, you need to have what's known as an AC charger, which simply takes that 240 volt AC power, converts it into 12 volt DC power that our batteries can accept, and charges those batteries. They're generally a smart charger these days, so they talk to the batteries back and forth and make sure they're continually optimizing that charge to make sure that the batteries are getting exactly what they need. So in our system, to summarize, we have 3 different chargers. We've got our DC-DC charger that handles that 12 volt load from our alternator. We have a solar charger which handles all the solar load from our yield from the rooftop solar, and we also have an AC charger to be able to charge the batteries up whenever we do have 240 volt power available. But as I said, you could simplify that system, and you may only find for example, if you have just a vehicle-based system, you may not need an AC charger and you may not need a solar regulator charger. You may be able to get away with just a DC-DC charger that has inbuilt solar regulation, and that way when you're parked up, that charger is going to run your solar panels and manage that feed into your batteries, and when you're driving, it's going to manage the feed from your engine, from your alternator. And if you've only got, for example, you figured out you only really need a 100 amp battery system, that may be more than enough charge for your system, and you may not need those other chargers. This is where it's really worth having spent that time figuring out how you're going to travel and how long you want to be self-sufficient for and stay off grid, to work out what charging system you need to make sure that whatever replenishment option you've chosen is optimized to get as much power as possible into those batteries when you need it, especially when you start looking at larger battery banks. Every amp does count when you're trying to get that power back into your system. Okay, so when it comes to AC and DC power, again, don't get too confused by all this and don't try and overthink it. It really just means that it's just the different way that power is delivered. What we need to remember is that our batteries store power in DC or direct current. All of your car systems in your vehicle and the power that it generates is DC. Your compressor fridges and all of your lights, pumps, all that sort of thing, anything that's plugged into that 12 volt socket or that's wired directly to your battery is a DC load. AC power is what you're used to around your home, so it's the higher voltage stuff like your 240 volt power outlets, your air conditioner in your caravan. All those higher voltage 240 volt stuff is alternating current. The only thing we need to be aware of there is we need to convert that power from AC to DC when we're putting it into our batteries, and if we need to run those appliances from our batteries, we need to convert it back into AC power that those appliances can use. So how do we convert our power from our batteries into AC power? That is where you need to look at an inverter. So if you're not going to run a generator, as we don't, we choose not to run a generator, the only way you're going to be able to generate 240 volt power for those household appliances off grid is by having an inverter. There are a variety of different sizes of inverters that are available. Again, your inverter is going to be rated in watts. So how many watts it can deliver is how that's going to be rated. And then obviously all those 240 volt appliances that you're going to be running are also rated in watts. So it's a pretty easy one to get an idea of how much you can run off that inverter. If you don't understand how inverters work, it is worth talking to an expert. We recommend getting in touch with whoever your preferred supplier is, or talk to a number of them if you're still figuring out who you're going to buy your battery system through, to understand what their inverters are capable of. Some will have what's known as a peak performance wattage rating and then a continuous wattage rating. So that basically just means while they may be rated to, for example, 2000 watts as a continuous, they're able to give you 2000 watts continuously. They may have a peak of, for example, 3000 watts, which basically means for a short period of time it can deliver more power, but it can't do it for an extended period of time. So that allows for spikes for things like air conditioners. When they first start up, they have what's known as a spike in power, where they basically ask for a lot of power, but then once they've started up, they don't need anywhere near as much power to run. So it is worth talking to whoever you're going to be buying your inverter and the rest of your battery system through, that you make sure that that inverter is rated or capable of running the appliances at 240 volt that you want to be able to run. The other thing you need to consider with that inverter is whether your batteries are able to deliver the amount of power that that inverter needs. Now, these days it's pretty common to have an inverter that's, say, 2,400 watts or even more, sometimes 3,000 watts, which when you convert that into 12 volt amps is a lot of amps that you're asking for from that battery. Now, even though your battery may be of a big enough size to be able to have that amount of amps in storage, it is about whether that battery is able to deliver that amount of power to that inverter. And that is where lithium technology and lithium battery technology is really changing the game, because we can now run big inverters and those lithium batteries are able to deliver that big amperage that those inverters are required to run. If you are looking at running a lot of 240 volt appliances, or large draw, I would call them, large wattage, high wattage 240 volt appliances, you really do want to be considering using a lithium battery system because of their ability to be able to deliver those high amperages that those devices require. Now that we've figured out how much power we're going to need, what our usage requirements are, what our regeneration is going to be, and how we're going to get that regeneration back into our battery bank, so through our charging system. By now we've also figured out whether or not we're going to be wanting to run an inverter, whether we need 240 volt appliances as part of our setup. That's going to start to determine what battery technology we're going to need, whether you can use an AGM battery, a lithium battery, a gel battery, or one of the other technologies. These days, as I said, lithium is becoming more and more prevalent as it becomes more and more affordable. Its cost is certainly what puts a lot of people off, but it is worth doing some sums, because generally lithium over a longer lifespan will work out cheaper because it does last longer. The batteries can handle a lot more cycles before they no longer perform to their maximum, basically, compared to AGMs, for example. So although that initial purchase price is higher, they will generally last a lot longer. They have a lot of other advantages as well. They'll accept charge a lot more readily. You can put a lot more charge into them. You can take a lot more out of them, as in you can have much higher draw from those batteries, which is why I recommend them if you're going to be running an inverter and things like that. They're also much lighter than AGMs. So for the same size battery bank, they're a lot lighter. And the last advantage to them is that you can use a lot more of the stored power inside the battery. So what some people may not realize is that although your battery may be rated to, for example, 100 amps, not all of that 100 amps is usable. You can't run those batteries dead flat or to 0% or use all of that power without causing damage to the battery. And different battery technologies have different tolerances for how much you can deplete their storage capacity. So a lithium battery, generally lithium batteries, they recommend that you don't take them below 20%, so therefore 80% of their rating is available to you. So for that same example, with a 100 amp battery, you could use up to 80 amps of that battery storage without causing any long-term damage to the battery, whereas an AGM style battery, so the old lead acid style batteries, most of those are only rated to be able to use 50% of their capacity regularly without causing long-term damage to the battery. So that same 100 amp hour battery would weigh a lot more, but you would also only be able to use 50 amps of that 100 amp storage on a regular basis without causing damage. When you start to talk about bigger off-grid systems and staying off-grid for longer, lithium really does start to stack up as the best option once you can get past that initial purchase price. So how much power do you really need is going to come back to, again, how long you want to travel for, where you're going to travel, how long you're going to be off-grid for, and really your battery bank becomes your storage in between replenishment opportunities. So obviously when you're considering a solar system, that solar yield is probably going to be about 8 hours a day that you're going to be able to get that solar charge back into your battery bank. And then for the remainder of the 24-hour period, you're going to need the batteries to be able to supply that power without any regeneration at all. To have an adequate amount of contingency to be able to spend long periods of time off grid, you really need at least a couple of days worth of usage available to be able to store it in your batteries. So for example, if you've figured out that you use 100 amps a day in your general usage, then you're probably going to want a battery system that's at least sort of 300 to 400 amps to allow you to get through those periods of time when you may not be getting much solar yield, for example in overcast conditions, or if you're just camping up somewhere where it's difficult to avoid shady periods. So for example, the Victorian High Country, if you're down deep in a valley, you may find that your solar yield is dramatically reduced compared to if you're sitting up in the tropics in a bright sunny campsite. With that being said though, you do sometimes just have to accept that sometimes you may have to go for a drive in your vehicle and shift camps to regenerate your batteries, or the other alternative would obviously be to run a generator if that's what you've decided to do as your backup option. So really you can go as big a battery system as you want, but the downside obviously is you're going to be spending more money and it's going to be more weight, and it's potentially just power that you're not going to be able to get back. So when it comes to specifying your system, regeneration or solar input is by far going to be more important to how long you're able to stay off grid rather than a huge amount of storage. Even if you've got a massive 800 amp, for example, battery storage system that can last you for days without any replenishment, you still somehow need to get that power back into those batteries. Now, if you're only driving for a few hours a day and you're getting mixed solar conditions, you're not getting a lot of solar yield, or you're limited by your physical roof space and how many portable solar panels you can carry, you may never be able to get that power back into those batteries without going to somewhere that has a 240 volt outlet to be able to plug in and charge those batteries up. Having high capacity chargers and being able to get maximum solar yield, maximum charge from your vehicle into your batteries is really your priority rather than having a huge battery bank. How big your battery bank is really just comes down to how much contingency you want to have for those cloudy conditions or those times when you're not going to be getting a huge amount of solar yield. It's going to come down to personal preference, how much contingency or how much backup power you're going to want to have, but it's really worth considering how you're going to get that power back in if you do decide to specify a larger system to have more contingency. Well, the sun has finally come out here down in Tassie. It's bloody bright. I'm having troubles not with my sunnies off, not squinting too much. But anyway.
All right, before we wrap up so we can get going for a swim.
Yeah, the kids have already jumped in the lake and I'm pretty keen to follow them in there. Well, I hope this video so far anyway has given you a little bit of an insight into how power systems work off grid and helping you to understand how you might be able to spec a system that's going to suit your needs. There are a couple of things we just want to touch on before we wrap up though. One of them is generators. So obviously we don't use a generator with our setup. We've managed to have a big enough lithium and solar setup that we don't really need one. There are some pros and cons like anything to generators. The pros are it's a relatively cost-effective solution for getting power. You can run them no matter what the weather is. And if, of course, generator means that you can have that 240 AC power whenever you like without the need of an inverter as well. So there are definitely some pros there. Can you think of any other pros?
No, I hate them.
The biggest downside is the noise.
Yeah.
They're also pretty heavy, they're smelly, and you've got to carry fuel for them. So it's just an extra fuel source that you'd have to carry. Most of us don't carry unleaded when we're traveling, so it means you've got to carry unleaded fuel to carry a generator. And there are a lot of campgrounds these days that you can't use them, or there's really limited hours you can use them. Even in free camps where you can use them, you've got to be considerate of your neighbours, I guess, as what hours you run them. You generally can't run them apart from daylight hours. You can't run them overnight, so they're only generating power at the same time that you would be generating power from your solar array anyway. These days solar's becoming pretty affordable, so we don't really see the need for them anymore in an off-grid system. I think they've sort of had their heyday.
Yeah, I can understand. If you've got one, you've already purchased it.
Yeah.
You're just using what you've got.
Yeah. The other thing we haven't really touched on is a lot of what we've been talking about is sort of more based around permanent installations or fixed systems, I guess, for off-grid systems. Portable off-grid power systems are becoming more and more viable.
The technology is becoming more advanced, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's catching up.
We've recently been testing out this little one behind us here. This is a little Blue Eddy power pack. So these all-in-one power packs that have charging ability and good output as well as battery storage built all into one little unit are really becoming more and more common, and there's some really interesting systems out there. So we're going to be doing a review of this one in an upcoming video. We're not going to go into that here, but we will touch on portable systems and who they might suit and whether that's something you might want to consider depending on how you camp, how often you travel, things like that. We found this one to be really, really handy, and we'll touch on that in the review as to how it's sort of fitted into to our system, even though we've got the big off-grid system in the caravan. This has been a real handy little bit of gear. So.
Absolutely, and all I can think is I wish we had this when we had our camper trailer.
Yeah.
It would have changed the game.
Yeah, that's right. So wrapping up then, the last thing you guys are going to know is how you can get your hands on this $100 voucher from the guys at Everything Caravan and Camping. And it's just the same as last time. It's as simple as...
Subscribe to our channel, so hit the little red subscribe button. There's a link in the description below to sign up to the ECC newsletter and leave us a comment. So it's simple as that. So if you're already subscribed and you're already signed up to the newsletter, all you got to do is leave a comment and you're in. You're in the draw.
You're 2/3 of the way there.
Absolutely.
So if you already did it last week, even if you entered last week, you're still eligible this week. So make sure you chuck a comment down below. Let us know what you thought of this video. Give us any feedback. Did you think we missed anything? Do you think we got anything wrong? More than happy to listen to that constructive criticism. Next week will be the next instalment of our Tassie travels. Looking forward to showing you more of that. We're having a great time down here, if you can't tell, especially when the weather's like this. So we're going to go and enjoy that. Until then, we will see you next Sunday. Nope. Try again. Cut that.
You didn't tell them what's coming up in the next off-grid episode.
Next off-grid episode, as we mentioned, is going to be going through our off-grid system and a real-world example, kind of like a case study, how it operates, what's good about it, what we don't like, did we get it right, what did we get wrong, what would we do
next time, what will we recommend to our friends when our friends ask us, or when they ask us, oh, I'm thinking about going travelling full-time next year, what would you recommend?
We're going to touch on all that. We're going to put everything you've learned in this video into practice and see how it works in a real-world example. Can't wait to show you that. That's in 2 weeks. Next week is that Tassie travel episode.
Yeah.
Either way, I don't know. There's lots coming out. The Blue Eddy review's coming out soon. We've got heaps more content coming up. We're going to be doing some other review videos coming out soon as well. You just be a part of it. Get amongst it. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. And guys, we'll see you next Sunday.
We'll see you next Sunday.